Welcome to another episode of the Animal Liberation Hour, where we seek insight from animal rights and liberation activists around the world so that we can think, reflect, learn, and be inspired. I'm your host for today's episode, Trey, and for this episode I sat down with Tiffany Stair of Rev Philadelphia. We discussed pressure campaigns, avoiding burnout, finding your niche in animal rights, and a lot more. I can't wait for you all to hear what she had to say. Before we get into the episode, I want to remind you that the Animal Liberation Hour is a project of Animal Activism Mentorship. AAM is a free multinational program that helps aspiring animal rights activists, as well as those who are already activists but want to take their activism to the next level. From one-on-one mentorship to free workshops and trainings to this podcast, AAM seeks to empower humans to fight for animals so that the world will have more activists and we can achieve liberation sooner. For more information, visit animalactivismmentorship.com and follow AAM on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Animal Activism Mentorship. You can also join the conversation on Clubhouse in the AAM Club, and join our Facebook group, Animal Activism Mentorship Community. You can also keep up with the Animal Liberation Hour on AAM's social media. Animal Activism Mentorship is fueled by Farm Animal Rights Movement. Tiffany was amazing. I can't wait for you to hear what she had to say. Enjoy. Tiffany, thanks for being here on the podcast. I want to know just how you became an animal rights activist. What's your story leading up to where you are now with animal rights?
Well, first, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm very excited about this. And so I've been vegan for almost 5 years, and I actually became vegan through Instagram. I went vegetarian for the animals, which was something I wanted to do for a long time. And I finally had, taken the plunge. I had no idea about eggs and dairy and, the whole nine with veganism. And I started to use Instagram more, and I came across the trailer for Earthlings, and I went vegan on the spot. I was just so traumatized by what I saw. I couldn't believe it. And I just overnight went vegan. And then right away, my explore page on Instagram started showing a lot of not just vegan food, but activism. And within a couple of months, I started to search online for Philly activists. And I came across a woman who's been doing activism in Philly for a very, very long time named Marianne Bessie. And she was hosting a rodeo protest. And I went there, and I was terrified to go, but I made a little sign. I went out and I stood out there for 2 hours with a sign, had a lot of people tell me to get a job and, to leave them alone. And I felt very empowered that I was doing something for the animals, whether it was effective or not. So after that, I joined a circus protest with the same group, and through a couple of weeks, the circus had been in town in Philly, and we gave out literature and held signs. And during that time, I felt, at first I was terrified to speak to people in public because I wasn't fueled with the information. So I would read up on what I was protesting before I would go out and focus on some main talking points, like with the circus. Circus is very easy to describe what goes on in terms of cruelty. And I became a little more comfortable talking to people, and I was handing out literature. And that's kind of how activism started for me. And that was back in 2017. So
props to you. My first street activism was leafleting on a college campus. I've been to rodeo protests, and I can't imagine that being my first action, because it's interesting. You get a ton of pushback at the rodeo, huh?
Oh my gosh, one guy got out of his truck and started getting in the face of a male activist, and I started filming, and I was shaking. I was so scared the guy was going to hit him. And from that moment on, I thought maybe initially that would scare me away from activism, but I was like, screw that. They need us out there. There's so much, like you said, pushback, especially with the rodeo and the circus. But yeah, those rodeo folks are no joke. They love their rodeos.
Oh yeah. And every time I've ever been to a rodeo protest, I feel like we've been threatened in some way or another, verbally at least. Yeah, that they're it's kind of wild. But yeah, so you found out just through the trailer of Earthlings. That's so interesting because social media I feel like has played a huge role in our movement. Do you use that in your activism? Do you try to how do you try to use social media to get other people to go vegan or get other people to become activists?
So when I first went vegan, I started using my Instagram page for veganism, and I remember the first post I put up, and this was several years ago, and it was a photo of a cow and a pig on one side, and then a dog and a cat, and it's like they all want to live a race dividing line, and there was a line between the animals, and I said, I'm going vegan. Please be kind during this journey. I'm going to speak up for animals, and then I just started reposting things I would find on Instagram. And now I'm not too tech savvy, but I definitely use my Instagram more so than Facebook. I'm not too active on Facebook, but I use Instagram to, create a lot of reels of our protests and our campaigns and share information. I'm not as involved anymore. I'm not that focused on getting people to go vegan because, as you know, when you grow as an activist, you kind of learn that getting people to go vegan really doesn't do anything for animals. I try to empower people to become activists and get out there and get on the streets and campaign and do what they can for the animals.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's a big debate about that on whether how much veganism actually helps animals. I do think being vegan kind of helps the animals because I think a lot of people find their way into activism through veganism. I know that I did, but yeah, I do agree that veganism isn't enough by any means. Like we're gonna have to take radical action to be able to.
This is Oscar. I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. For those that can't see, Tiffany and I both have all kinds of dogs in our in our frame on Zoom here. But yeah, so we are going to have to take action. I think sometimes people go vegan and they think that's enough, and they think that leading by example, so to speak, is enough. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what is the importance of activism? Why do we need activism for things to change?
Well, if you look back in history, any of the major social justice movements really weren't propelled by just lifestyle. People were out on the streets and creating change that way. So I felt like, I could influence as many people as possible in my life. And, when you go vegan, family and friends are the hardest to get to. And after almost 5 years, I still don't have everyone vegan in my life, but almost everyone, which is great. But I feel like as an activist, that is the minimum I could be doing to try to change the world. And I feel this huge responsibility on just myself as an individual, not necessarily as an organization, but just myself, that I have to physically do something to create change. And I think that the more people we have strength in numbers, and the more activists we have on the streets, the more changes will be made for animals. And I think that, by not being active, you're living the life. You may be living the lifestyle, but what are you really doing on a large scale for animals?
Yeah, I love the analogy that people often use for this, which is if you're walking down the street and you see a dog and someone's hitting the dog, and you just walk on by and you don't partake in hitting the dog, that's veganism. All it means is you're not participating in the violence, which is great that you're not. We shouldn't participate in the violence. I think that's, key. Now, if you join in and beat the dog, that's carnism. If you actually intervene and try to help the dog, that's activism. So how do you think we can inspire more people to get out of this idea that veganism is enough? Because there's so few vegans in the world, and a fraction of that fraction are actually activists and actively doing things to try to achieve animal liberation. What can we do to try to get more people involved?
So, like we talked about, I think social media is huge. I think that people seeing that there are others out there that cares just as much as them about animals and want to save the planet and better their health, but most importantly, you're out there for the animals. I think social media is the best tool we have. So like I'd said before, I create a lot of videos of the activism that, we do as Rev Philly. And I hear all the time from people that I don't know, I want to get involved in this. How can I? So I think, the best tool we have is actually using social media to show people what you can do to create change and to help the animals. Other than that, I talk, to people that are vegan in my life. Like I work with a couple of nurses that are vegan. They're not activists. And I just ask them, I'm like, just come to a horse protest. Just come and hold a sign and tell me what you think. And I've had a couple people come and they actually really enjoyed it. And they said, this is the first time I actually felt like I was doing something to help. So, leading by example, I think in that sense is very important to inspire others to get out there on the streets. But definitely for me, I think, the biggest influence I could have on others is through social media.
So you do have a job and you do care about humans if you're a nurse, huh?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I do. I've been a nurse for 18 years.
That's amazing. But yeah, my sister was in a terrible accident many years ago, and just seeing like how much these nurses have to deal with, and that I know they're dealing with like compassion fatigue and just long hours and all this other stuff, and you're doing that on top of being an activist. That's amazing.
Thank you. Well, the other thing is I do a lot of activism at work. I constantly am on the other nurses and physicians. I'm like, what are you eating? Do you realize you're eating someone's body part? I'll take the milk out of we have these little cartons of milk, and I'll throw them in the trash, and I'll bring almond milk and oat cream and all this stuff. And we'll have like events, like if it's a holiday and we're all working, everybody cooks. So I'll bring a vegan dish and I'll make like triple the amount so people can take it home and feed it to their family. And people always love the food. So yeah, I do a lot of activism at work, and I do it with patients and patients' families as well. So I work in like a critical care unit. So most of my patients are on life support, and they're being fed through a tube with like a tube feeding. It's like a liquid concoction of all kinds of stuff, but it's mostly sugar and dairy. And it's really sad because these patients end up having a lot of other health issues as a result of what we're feeding them. And they end up, with high blood pressure that they didn't have before. They end up on insulin and all kinds of other issues. So there are alternatives. Unfortunately, they're not covered by insurance. So exactly. There's an amazing tube feeding that's vegan, and it's all organic. And when families do have the means, which really sucks because, this is like something that's, it's very expensive out of pocket. But when they do have the means, and I always say, try Liquid Hope, order it on Amazon, bring it in, and we'll feed it to them. All of these issues resolve, Wow. Yeah. And the physicians are always like, it's just crazy that not everyone can make the connection, especially people that work in the medical field, and ethics aside, just the health aspect alone, it's just, I work with a few vegan nurses and doctors, but overall, everyone eats animals, and it's pretty disappointing. But yeah, I do a lot of activism at work too.
That's something that I didn't even think about. Like, what are they feeding you? Like, if you're in critical care through the tubes, that's great that there's an alternative. But man, it just shows how much work we have to do to know that it's not covered by insurance. I mean, that's sad. I mean, it's the healthier option. Aren't we trying to improve our health when we're in the hospital? That doesn't make any sense.
I know someone with cardiac surgery, and then immediately post-op they're eating bacon and eggs. It's just, I can't believe, sometimes my mind is blown, and I go on these rants and I get angry, and everybody's like, oh God, here she goes. But I think it plants seeds, and people are always like, I'm going to be 40, and people that I work with, some of these nurses are like 21, 22, and they're like, how do you have so much energy? I'm like, it's plants. It's what I eat. You guys are eating like chicken and beef for lunch, and everyone's tired after lunch, and no one has energy to keep going. And, I'm eating like a quinoa bowl, and I feel great.
100%. Because when I went vegan, I did it for the animals, but I mean, the health benefits, I lost so much weight and, just felt generally better. I quit drinking coffee like a little over a year ago. I was drinking coffee to try to like stay awake and do things. And I just started replacing that with like a smoothie or something. That gives me energy, not the coffee. That doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I'm sure you're doing a lot of good work, like not only as part of your actual job, but all the activism you're doing there and helping patients and educating people. That's really amazing. I guess it never stops when you're an animal rights activist.
It never stops. And I'll, under my scrubs, I'll wear like an animal rights tee, so you can sometimes see the lettering, and people will ask what I'm wearing. And yeah, I feel like I'm always doing something in every aspect of my life that's related to animals.
Well, that's absolutely amazing. So you mentioned Revolution Philadelphia, also known as Rev Philly, earlier. Talk about that, because I am just in awe of this organization. I love it so much. Y'all are always doing so much, and a lot of strategic campaigns, which I'm a big fan of. So yeah, just talk about Rev Philly and what y'all do.
Thank you. I am extremely beyond proud of Rev Philly. We've come a very long way, especially for only being active for about 2 years now, a little more than 2 years. So back in the day, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was an activism group in Philly that kind of dissolved. And I would go to their actions. I wasn't really a part of the team, but I would go to their actions and participate in that way. But they dissolved, and Monsi, who is Rev Philly's founder, was a part of that group. And then I noticed that Monsi was starting Revolution Philadelphia. So, Devin and I kind of met through that, and Devin had organized the Earthlings experience through Rev Philly, and we did a couple of slaughterhouse auctions. So we all just kind of bonded and felt we just vibed really, really well. So right now at this point, Monsi's our founder, and Devin and I are the main organizers, and we have a fantastic team of committed people in Philly. We've had several activists that we just love dearly move away. One moved to Florida, one moved to South Carolina. So we're always, people are always coming in and out, but we have a really great core group of activists that we appreciate so much. And Devin and Monsi, I couldn't do it without them.
Yeah. I mean, Rev Philly has been a huge part, in my opinion, of some of these fur victories, Sachs and Neiman Marcus and YSL, to name a few. And right now you're working really hard on this horse carriage campaign. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So Well, just on the fur really quickly, that is Devin's jam. Like, Devin is disruptions still terrify me to this day, but I used to like shake before we went into a disruption. I would be so scared. But Devin has been the key instrument in all of our fur campaigning. She has handled all of the disruption planning and execution, and obviously you've probably seen some of her speak outs. They're very explosive. So yeah, she is our fur gal, and she has been really great in executing all of these campaigns. And through those disruptions, I've definitely become more comfortable, so to speak, making noise. I'm a non-confrontational person, but I think the fur campaign really helped me find my voice as an individual and become a little more outspoken in that aspect. But the horse carriage campaign is something that is very, very meaningful to me. I'll start by saying I've never, even before I was vegan or anything, I know nothing about horses. I never rode a horse. I was actually always kind of scared of them. But I think it was last year or maybe the year before. I think it was last year. There was a tragic accident in Central Park in New York City. There was a horse named Aisha who collapsed on the street, and she had to be euthanized. And I saw Adita from New York City share that video, and I was enraged. I was very emotional, but I was so angry that they still existed. And I knew they existed in Philly as well, but I really wasn't, I didn't know much about the carriages in Philadelphia. So I saw that video and I said, I have to do something. We have to do something in Philly and start this campaign. So what had happened was there's a woman named Janet White. She's an independent person that has been working on this through city council for maybe 3 or 4 years. She's held a couple demos, but she's not really a street activist. She does more of the behind the scenes legislative piece. And right before COVID hit, I had gotten her information. I reached out to her and I said, can we meet and talk about a campaign for the horses? And she's absolutely. So we had met down at Independence Hall where the horses are lined up to give rides, and we talked for a while, and we decided, she said, I need activists on the ground. We need to really start putting pressure on city council. And I was like all about it. I thought this was great. And then COVID hit. And I think at that time the horses were off the street anyway. So everything got pushed back. And, over that period of time with COVID, Rev Philly, we kind of had our hands in 20 different pots, and we weren't getting anything done. We do slaughterhouse vigils and like the Earthlings experience, which we now call the Revolution experience. And we would, we wanted to do this huge campaign to transition the live slaughter markets to greenhouses. And we wanted to do so much, but nothing was getting done because we were spreading ourselves so thin. So that's when when the fur campaign started and the horses, we kind of reeled everything in and said, okay, what is winnable? And we learned a lot of that through, obviously the Cranky Vegan. What campaigns can we focus on that are winnable? And just 1 or 2, not 10. And, the fur obviously was a huge one, and the horses were the second. So as soon as the COVID restrictions were lifted and life started to kind of somewhat return to normal, we decided to start having protests. And while, we do these regular protests at least twice a month and we're out there, we also do a lot with city council. We've met with a couple council members over Zoom, and Janet is, our main speaker on that. She handles, we have the legislation ready to go, and, she presents it to council and everything, but we don't have anyone that will champion the bill yet. So in the meantime, while we're still trying to, schedule meetings with these council members, we are hitting them hard on social media. So right now I have a major social media storm. We started a few weeks ago. We wanted to, Kaporis had just happened, and we wanted to wait for that to pass to launch our selfie campaign. So we had asked activists to either send us a selfie or post a selfie of them holding a sign that says something like Philly City Council ban horse carriages, or, pass legislation now, or some kind of slogan to influence council to take action. So the campaign is ongoing. We're posting every day, the number of selfies, but we've gotten over 200 submissions, which is amazing. A lot of people posted it to their own page, tagging council. But this selfie campaign, we are using like 8 to 10 photos per post. We're tagging every council member in each photo. So they can't ignore us. They have to, pay attention to what we're trying to do for the horses. So with that campaign, we're also doing a little bit of undercover work and going out there and trying to catch them on violations. So we did our first investigation last weekend. We kind of went incognito because the drivers know us. And we filmed a lot of violations going on. So it's crazy to see what they are willing to do when they think no one's watching. But we're watching constantly.
Yeah, I think that's so important because, a lot of times laws are passed for animals that help, but nobody's willing to enforce those laws sometimes. So it's kind of like sometimes as activists, we have to do that job as well. We have to actually catch these people, breaking the law. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle. And it's all, based around speciesism, obviously. Some of my friends were just at a horse carriage protest in Florida, and I was talking to one of the activists about it, and, they called the police to let them know that they were, not giving the horses the amount of time that they were supposed to rest legally and everything like that. And the police showed up and they didn't do anything. They didn't care. It's sad. It's sad that we have to do the job of an animal rights activist, but sometimes also try to do the job of, legislators and the police as well. Yeah.
Yeah, because, on a grand scale, Philly is one of the most dangerous cities in the country, and there's a lot going on here. So horses are last on their list, but we have to keep the horses in the forefront of their minds and, tell them over and over again, we're not going anywhere. We're basically trying to be huge pains in the asses to them until they take action.
100%. Yeah. That's what you have to do.
You have to do. And that's what I think it ties with the fur campaign. We kept disrupting and email blasts and phone blasts until they had to address it. So that's kind of our tactic with the horses as well. And as far as the laws go, yeah, they're not enforced. We have an animal control agency that's responsible here for enforcing those laws for horses. And the main thing is getting it on film, because then we can take that and release it to media. We had some media coverage on our campaign, which is great. So we're planning to send all of that footage to them as well. So once they get that negative press attention, they're going to have to do something. And with cities all over the world getting rid of horse carriages because they realize, number one, they're unethical and they're inhumane, but they're extremely dangerous. And most cities that ban them because somebody was killed or something major happened. There was a catastrophe that led them to a ban. We don't want to see that happen in Philly. We want to see the carriage industry ended and before something like that happens. And we say that over and over again during our protests. Don't wait until somebody gets killed by a carriage horse. Do this now. Do the right thing now. And, the other thing we ask people on the streets is, with horses, what would the horse choose? If a horse could tell you, would they rather have freedom and family and pastures and grazing and living their lives out in peace, doing what they want to do, be a horse, or would they want to be giving people carriage rides for 76 Carriage Company on the streets of Philadelphia that are polluted and loud and scary? I think they would choose freedom. So, and that really affects people. I mean, we get people to stop going on rides all the time. They'll be going to go for a ride. We'll speak to them and they'll change their minds, which is great.
You're kind of hitting them from all different kinds of angles. You're doing the outreach side, you're doing the public pressure side, you're doing the political side, and kind of using all those things to, put that pressure on. And what you said earlier, don't wait till something happens. I mean, obviously we're in this to, for animal liberation, but also, it is a human safety issue and an animal safety issue. Here in the Carolinas where I live, just months ago, a friend of mine, or a couple of friends of mine, had started a campaign to end horse carriages in Charlotte, and we had been emailing some of the lawmakers there. And, they forwarded our email to the main carriage company there, and he responded back to us and said, we've never had an accident, blah, blah, blah. I'm talking probably weeks later, that same company, they weren't in Charlotte, they were in another smaller town in North Carolina when it happened, but they were in some park somewhere, and somebody didn't have their dog on a leash. The dog came up and started attacking the horse. And the dog ended up having to be euthanized because the horse was defending himself or herself. And the horse, was probably pretty close to having run off. One of the carriage workers was injured. I mean, it was a whole big, awful, awful thing. And this is what we're risking for what, for some quote unquote romantic little ride or whatever. The horse doesn't want to be ridden, or the horse doesn't want to pull anyone, especially in the terrible heat. And it's a huge safety issue. But how can people support this campaign if they want to support it?
So the beauty of this campaign, and it's really strange because obviously horse carriages and fur are completely different things, but they are very similar in many ways because we attract non-vegans. Which, if you asked me 2 years ago, I would have said, screw that, you have to go vegan and join us. Now, times are changing. I'm a lot more educated and open-minded about this, but we have a lot of people joining that aren't vegan, and we welcome them. We think, hopefully with some time, they'll change their habits and go vegan, but we have a lot of supporters. People that still eat animals don't like fur. People that still eat animals don't like horse carriages, and hopefully as a result, they'll stop eating animals because they'll see, the similarities. But we have a petition going. It's been going for a few years now. And right now at this time, we have 30,000 signatures, which is amazing. We don't really have a goal. We'd love to see it at 50. We keep sharing it to try to gain, more momentum on it, so council will take it seriously. So the petition it's a change petition, and it's on the bio of our Rev Philly account on Instagram. They can also email lawmakers. Our city council members, they want to hear from their constituents. They claim they do. So if we could influence people to just send a quick message, I won't visit Philadelphia unless you ban horse carriages, or, you should adopt ethical tourism in the city of Philadelphia. Horse carriages are outdated and dangerous. A quick little email can have a huge impact. And also, like I said before, our selfie campaign is still going, so we would love to receive more selfies so we can post them and tag the hell out of every council member in Philadelphia. But in the meantime, and if you're local to Philly, come to our protests. We always love to welcome new people to them. So those are definitely huge ways that you could help the horses in this campaign. And I think I know it's going to happen. I mean, we're not giving up until it does. I would love to have seen it happen a little faster than it has, but it's going to happen. And I see it happening within the next year or so.
Yeah, I want to go to something you said a minute ago about, a couple of years ago you had a different outlook on things. You would have been holding people accountable till they went vegan. I think we're pretty similar in this because, you know, I was kind of the same way, and I'm pretty much, from what you're talking about, from how I'm hearing you, we're pretty much on the same page now. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, I know some people think single issue campaigns in general, like fur or horse carriages, are speciesist, but how would you defend that? And how would you defend working with, you know, non-vegans toward these victories of single issue campaigns?
So, yeah, a few years back, if you participated in eating animals or wearing animals, you were an animal abuser, you know, and I would get on people about that all the time. But I was an animal abuser then, and I loved animals my whole life, and I wasn't an animal abuser even when I ate them. And oftentimes, I think when you first go vegan, you're very angry. You feel like you've been lied to and duped, and you want to take on the world and make the world go vegan, and you're not going to. It's just a fact of life. You're not going to change every individual and make them go vegan. And I used to have this approach that if, like my dad would say, we would get into actual arguments about this. He would say, you know, why can't you just support people that are reducing their intake in hopes that they eventually will make that change? And I'm like, well, it's not enough. And people will think that reductionist approach will be enough. But it's really not the case. And it may sound anecdotal, but that's what I've seen in my own life. I've seen people that I care about, like family and friends, reduce their intake, but they all have gone vegan. So I think that having patience with people and being open-minded and, you know, that like loving, compassionate approach, you know, you attract more flies, not with honey, agave, but it's like that whole saying, it works. And the single issue campaigns, yeah, I used to think they were dead in the water. I didn't think that they made any impact on animal liberation, but it's clear that they do. You know, if you look at fur, how many thousands of animals now are going to be spared because of Saks and Neiman Marcus and YSL and all of the other designers going fur free. So, you know, it may not be the steps we want to see. We want to see the world go vegan overnight, but it's just not going to happen. So how can we get there? We have to take these small steps. We have to do these single issue campaigns because it will lead to a much broader effect on the world and on the animals overall.
Yeah, for sure. I think we need to look at other movements in history. You know what I mean? Like when Martin Luther King led the campaign in Birmingham, you know, it wasn't a campaign to completely eradicate racism. I think he knew that was maybe too tall a task at the time. He said, well, let's get rid of segregation. That'll, you know, send us, you know, be a big step. And that's what they did. They demanded change and forced people to change who were still racist. You know what I mean? He and everybody there forced them to change. And yeah, I think we've got to be strategic. You know, there's a lot of people who are not vegan, which I think that everyone should be vegan. I do. But there's a lot of people who are not vegan who might still consider themselves animal lovers that might get behind a fur campaign or might get behind a horse carriage campaign. So, you know, should we tell them not to even bother helping any animals if they're not going to be completely vegan? I mean, I think it's important to educate them about speciesism and everything else, but, you know, let's not turn anyone down who wants to help animals, especially like with single issue campaigns, if it's something they can get behind. I want to go back to something you said way earlier that I think is extremely important and something that we do not talk about enough in our movement. And that is when you were talking about how at first, you know, Rev Philly was just stretched in all these different directions. You know, as an animal rights activist, you have so much weight on your shoulders. You want to help every animal. You want to help every species of animal. You've got all these ideas. You've got all these, you know, campaigns that you could do. But obviously, you know, every person is only one person. I'm not saying that we shouldn't reach for the stars, but at the same time, we should also be realistic because, I mean, it's possible to take on so much that you're actually not getting anything done at all. And I would love for you to speak more about that, because I think that it's probably a problem that a lot of animal rights activists have. I know that was me for sure. I was organizing outreach events. I was organizing vigils. I was doing leafleting. I was doing, everything, like all at the same time. And I was getting really burned out, which, if you, then I wouldn't have been doing anything at all if I got completely burned out. So can you just talk a little bit about strategy as far as your own personal activism and, not burning yourself out and focus? Can you just talk a little bit about those things?
Sure. So avoiding burnout is something that is very difficult to achieve, especially when you're new to activism. I burned myself out many times. And as you know, most activists, I mean, mental health is huge to try to maintain when you're seeing so much violence and just horrible things happening in the world. And I think, obviously people say this all the time, like taking time out for yourself, taking a break and, all of that. And that's so important. But something else that I think is really important is not spreading yourself too thin. I was doing the same thing. We wanted to do so much in Philly, and joining, other campaigns and supporting this and supporting that and TNR. And it's like there are so many issues that you could consume yourself just knowing that there's so much happening that you can't fix, that it will crush you, right? So we decided what can what can we win? What can we strategize on, and what can we achieve as a city for the animals? When Rev Philly first started, there was this amazing idea, and it was slaughterhouse to greenhouse, right? It's amazing. We have a lot of 10 live markets, maybe 12 live markets in Philadelphia, and we'd hold vigils there, and we wanted to do this campaign to transition these live markets. That's a lot. And we at that time we had this idea, and Monsi was working on like applying for grants and trying to learn more from like Connie Spence about how we could do this. And it was a big undertaking. And while we were focusing on that, or just kind of talking about that, we were also doing these Earthlings experiences. We were doing vigils outside of these slaughterhouses. We were trying to support other activists because, New York and New Jersey are very close, and we go to their actions as often as we can and support their campaigns. And then we just had so much going on. And like I'd said before, we weren't making any progress. Because every time we would have a Zoom meeting, we would have another idea of something else we could do. And it's like, oh my gosh, we're never going to get anything done if we keep piling on more work. So, and there's only 3 of us. So, we saw the fur campaign kind of taking off, and people, mobilizing all over the country to focus on one store or one designer. And we thought that was a great idea. We decided Saks was our first target, and we got in on that. And we were like, wow, Saks went for free. Like, it was like that victory was so motivating. We're like, wow, focusing on this one thing, we got results. So what else can we do? Focusing on one issue, and where can we see results? We're not going to close the live markets in Philly right now. We're not going to get them all to go to greenhouses. That's more of a 5-year plan for us at this point. But where can we focus our energy? Standing outside of the slaughterhouse and holding a sign is great. We need vigils. It's very important to bear witness to these victims. But that's not what we should be. What are we going to do by doing that? we can go to the live markets and rescue. We do it often, and we'll save a life or two and place them in sanctuary, but we're not going to close down a live market. So we decided to kind of redirect our energy into these campaigns such as Saks, where we're seeing results. So that's when kind of the horse carriage campaign was born, and we went from there. And, people email me and message me all the time. We have a huge Amish community in a town called Lancaster, which is I'm in the suburbs of Philly, and it's about an hour from me. And they're like, well, what about the Amish horses? What are you doing for them? And I'm like, well, what are you doing? Why don't you start a campaign and I'll support it? But we're focused on the horse-drawn carriages right now. Maybe once that's banned, we'll move on to something else. I would love to go after that, the horse and buggy industry in Amish country, but it's just not something. I won't see results because I won't be able to put a lot of effort into it. So as much as I want to change every single industry overnight, it's just not going to happen. So I think it's important when you're an activist and you're strategizing with other activists in your area, just choose something that everyone cares about, that's going to help animals, and that's actually winnable, where you're going to see results. And then once that's achieved, you move on to the next target. And we saw the same success with all of the fur, with the stores. So we're seeing results, so we should just continue with that, strategy.
Yeah, I think choosing what's winnable can be actually one of the hardest parts of the whole thing. It takes a lot of research. And I mean, the good news is if you don't want to do that research, find some campaigns that are already working and just get involved with those. But if you want to start your own campaign, yeah, it does take a lot of research to figure out what's winnable. I 100% feel you when you're like, when people say, what are you doing about this? I'm like,
you do it. I'll support you.
100%. Like people all the time, just people off the street, they'll roll their window down when I'm out at a protest or something and say, well, what are you doing about, X issue and Y issue and Z issue? I'm like, man, I tell you what, if you organize it, I'll be there. And they always just look at me like, oh yeah, that means I would have to do something.
Right. I can't just criticize you for your efforts. I actually would have to do something.
The way that I envision like pressure campaigns in my head is obviously we want liberation for all animals. But I imagine like as an activist, you walk into a room, there's, like say 3 different cages. One cage, all you have to do is open it and the animals can run out. One cage, all you need are some bolt cutters and you can get the animals out. Maybe the third cage is, surrounded in, you've got to have a access code and it's surrounded in metal and you can't, get to it. Why, when those other 2 cages that are easier, when they're right there, why are you, like chipping away at this giant one that's going to take years and years to get into when, like while we're waiting on this really heavily guarded cage to, open, let's at least, let these animals out of this first one and, get the bolt cutter and help the ones in the second one because it's more achievable, right? Why should those animals have to wait when, it's more winnable to get them out? That's kind of the way I envision it in my head when people say, hey, single issue campaigns or speciesists, or hey, why are you doing this for this species of animals, but you're not doing this? It's like, let's get the animals that we can get out while we can,
Right. Absolutely. That's a great analogy. I'm definitely going to use that.
Yeah, that's just the way I picture it in my head. But so I want to ask you, you've been an activist for a while now, and some of your philosophies have changed and things like that. But what have been some of your biggest obstacles as an activist? We talked a little bit about, burnout and compassion fatigue, and maybe it's some of those things. I don't know if you've mentioned what some of the biggest obstacles are, but what are some of the biggest obstacles you've faced, and how have you either overcome them or how are you managing them?
So a couple of years ago, when I was an angry vegan, I had severe compassion fatigue. I would feel very helpless and that I really wasn't making a difference. And I went into a very deep depression over it. And, I sought some therapy and that really helped. But I think staying focused and focusing on what you are doing is really important. For example, if you go to a slaughterhouse or a live market, I remember being with an activist a couple years ago and we saved a chicken and she was just crying for the chickens that we couldn't save. And I was elated that we saved this chicken, and those were like our differences in how we saw that. And I try to stay focused on what I'm doing that's bringing positive outcomes. So that was a big obstacle. I didn't know how to deal with my emotions because they were so significant when I was faced with suffering of animals. Going to a family member's house and seeing them eat animals, I would be completely devastated. Now I just don't go. I'll come over after dinner, I'm very fortunate. My family now only eats vegan when I'm around, which is great. If they have parties and we're going, it's all vegan. So I'm very, very lucky in that regard. But I didn't know how to process all of the horrible things happening to animals. So focusing on the positives, I know I'm a pessimist at heart. I look at the worst in everything, glass is half empty all the time. But when, for example, like that rescue story, I thought I would be the one crying for the chickens we left behind. And of course, it's horrible. We had to leave those animals behind. But this one animal is now living her best life at a sanctuary, and we rescued her from becoming someone's dinner. Changing my mindset in that regard was huge. So I would say the biggest ones are definitely the compassion fatigue and learning how to process the emotions, especially when you're a new activist. It's just really hard because you're really pissed off at the world. And I think it's important to, really process those emotions in an effective manner and address those issues that you're having. And yeah, I mean, if you asked me this a couple years ago, I would have said, we're not getting anything done. And I know we keep talking about that, but that's a huge thing for Rev Philly. I think we've overcome as an obstacle is that we weren't getting anything done, and now we're getting everything done. So that's really huge for us.
I think the wins can be good for the burnout too. You know what I mean? Like when you sometimes we do activism that is, I guess, less tangible. Like you may not fully understand the impact that it may have had, or maybe it didn't have an impact. You just don't know. But being able to win a campaign and have something tangible, I think that's actually super important for the mental health of activists too, to know that we're making a difference, to know that it's not a waste of time, to know that we're putting ourselves through all of this, but it's worth it because we're getting things done. I think that's huge. I think that's huge too. And I think anger is okay as long as we know how to control it and channel it too, because anger can be a great motivator, and it can allow us to speak passionately and act in a way that we can get things done. If anger is what moves you to do things, then by all means use it as long as you can control it. So my last question for you, unless you have anything else to add, is what advice do you have for new activists that are seeking to make effective change for the animals?
So if you're a new activist, I would definitely encourage you to research your local activism groups online. A lot of cities have a few, some just have one. Philly has a couple, but figure out what kind of change you want to make. What kind of activism interests you? Do you want to talk to people on the streets? Do you want to do online activism? You can do that without joining a group. You can, do that on your own, which is great. I think, meeting people that are like-minded is huge, because oftentimes when people are activists, they feel like they're the only one in the world that wants to do this, or they're the only activist they know. So I think finding people that have the same goals is really important if you want to, join a community. But I think researching online, like looking up online who's local, what they're doing, what campaigns are they working on, and if you feel that you can contribute, or if you want to join and get on the streets, whether that's through outreach or protesting or bearing witness, I think that that's definitely where somebody should start, for sure. And, using that energy, because like I said before, new activists, you have a lot of emotions. So using those emotions and energy to, channel it through effective activism is huge. And going back real quick to what you said about these winnable things, Saks was our first fur target, and we'd gone there several times and nothing was happening. And we were kind of getting discouraged. We're just like, we didn't want to keep going back. Especially because the cops were always there. Were we going to be arrested? We didn't know what was going to happen. But when we were like, oh, okay, I guess we'll plan another Saks protest. And then they announced they were going for free. We were crying on the phone. We could not believe that happened. And we were like, wow, we were a part of that. And that was the first time for me as an activist that I actually felt like I was doing something, through these Earthlings experiences that we would do and whatnot. Talking to people on the street was always great. I love doing that. But I actually did something to help animals on a large scale. So I think, activists that are looking to create that kind of change, it's really, I think it would be great for them to join a group that's focused on those individual targets and participate in that.
Yeah, and there's so many ways to get involved in pressure campaigns too. Like if you're not able to, march into a store and, turn the siren on your megaphone on and all that. I mean, there's so many different things, from graphic design to desk work to video editing to, communications to writing up press releases to, just so many different ways that you can be involved in a pressure campaign, making phone calls, commenting on social media. It depends on the campaign, really. But when we're talking about pressure campaigns, I think sometimes when we talk about it, people think, oh, you have to stand outside with a sign or march in with a megaphone. And both of those things are awesome. I personally love doing those things, and I think it's effective. But, people should find that niche, right? Find what you're good at, and you can still apply that to a pressure campaign if you want to, right? I mean, that's one of the things, when I started out in activism, I wish I had known.
Same. Me too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, me too. And those little actions are actually huge. The emails, with our horse campaign, just email the council members. Just send them a quick blurb about why you don't want horse carriages in Philly. It has a huge impact. So yeah, you do not have to be out there on the streets screaming and on the megaphone. And although we definitely love that and we want those people too, but we also want you in those other roles. If you feel like that's where you're most comfortable and most effective is, writing the emails. And like you said, the graphic design, that's huge. I still struggle with creating images and graphics for the Rev Philly account when I'm making the horse carriages. Canva's my best friend, and I feel like I'm starting to get a little bit better at it, but yeah, I still struggle with that. So we need those people big time. And video editing, another huge one, because we love posting these videos of these really badass actions that happen. And so yeah, definitely encouraging new activists to find what they're good at and find that niche for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's been awesome. Anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, thank you for everything. And I love what you guys are doing. And I think that through, your efforts, you guys are going to bring a whole new, gang of activists into this movement. And I think that's huge.
I hope so. We're so happy that you came on the podcast. We love you. We love Rev Philly. We're so excited for people to hear this, and just thanks for everything that you do.
Oh, thank you, Trey.
We are so appreciative of Tiffany for coming onto the podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. Please rate and review the podcast. It helps others find it more easily. And the more people that find it, the more people can be inspired by the amazing guests we have on the show like Tiffany and turn that into actionable change for the animals. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Animal Activism Mentorship, where you can keep up with the podcast as well as everything AAM. You can also join our Facebook group, Animal Activism Mentorship Community, and join the discussion on Clubhouse in the AAM Club. One more reminder that you can sign up for a free mentor to help you with your activism at animalactivismmentorship.com. If you needed a sign that you should be an activist for animals, this is it. Remember that it will take all of us to achieve animal liberation, so stay focused, stay positive, be effective, and keep doing your part. Until next time.